Good afternoon. Welcome to today's presentation on long-term care Medicaid. We have several Legal Aid of the Bluegrass employees with us today. We have myself, Wayne Ann Caudill, and Amanda Hamilton. We are District Long-Term Care Ombudsman. We're pleased to also have Stephanie Langguth, an attorney with Legal Aid of the Bluegrass. She is our Economic Stability Unit Manager. We want to have a conversation today about frequently asked questions that we often get about long-term care Medicaid. We have a lot of questions. Our families have a lot of questions when they start thinking about nursing home care. How am I going to pay for this? What happens to my spouse who's left at home? And hopefully by the end of today's presentation, you'll have some answers. And maybe if you're thinking about nursing home placement in the future, you'll have some comfort. Because I really think it is a very stressful time thinking about nursing home placement, but we're going to try to put some of those fears to rest here. So I want to say welcome to Stephanie. Thank you for being with us today. Stephanie, can you tell us just in a broad way, what is long-term care Medicaid and how do you qualify?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Wayne Ann. As she said, I'm Stephanie Langguth. I'm an attorney at Legal Aid of the Bluegrass. And long-term care Medicaid comes in different forms. So there is long-term care Medicaid that will help pay for a waiver for someone who is getting care out of their home instead of being in a nursing home. But today, what we're going to focus on is long-term care Medicaid for people who are residents in a nursing facility. Now, the rules are very similar. There are small differences between waiver long-term care and nursing facility long-term care, but that's what we're going to focus on today. And basically, most people who end up in a nursing home who are not super wealthy and who did not purchase long-term care insurance policies end up having to apply for long-term care Medicaid. So even people who have worked really hard and saved their money, when you're in a nursing home for a long period of time, you burn through your money pretty quickly because it's very expensive and it just keeps getting more expensive. So you have to have limited resources in order to qualify for long-term care Medicaid and limited income. But there are ways to get around both the income and the resource issues. So that's a pretty vague amount. I think we're going to ask me some more questions. Maybe we can go into the particulars of it.
Absolutely. When you said there are some workarounds and some ways to get qualified, I think we wanted to really talk about something called a QIT, Qualified Income Trust. And I think Amanda actually has some questions about the QIT process.
Hi, Stephanie. So one of the most common questions I get speaking with families is, do I have to have a QIT before I can apply for Medicaid? You know, a lot of times they'll speak to a Medicaid rep at the facility and they'll tell them that they have to have it set up or they won't qualify for Medicaid, they'll be denied. And, you know, I just wanted to see if you could clarify that for us.
Absolutely. That's a great question. Now, what someone might need a qualifying income trust for, or sometimes they call it a Miller Trust, we just call it a QIT for short, is when the individual who is in the nursing home, if their income exceeds the special needs standard, some people call it the special income standard. That amount changes every year. It's always 3 times the amount of supplemental security income. So for this year, that amount is $2,523. So if your gross income, and that's your income before any deductions, before your Medicare premium, other health insurance, taxes, it's the gross income. If your gross income exceeds the special needs standard, the $2,523, you're not eligible for long-term care Medicaid. But you can make yourself eligible by setting up a qualifying income trust. And that's something that Legal Aid of the Bluegrass can help people who reside in our service area to do, or if you don't reside in our service area, all legal aids usually do that, so it's a free thing that you can get from a legal aid attorney. And so the QIT is not required before you apply for Medicaid. you usually don't know that you need one until you go in and they look at your income and they calculate it and see if it exceeds the special needs standard. And so when you actually apply for Medicaid, they give you 30 days to return documents to them, and they'll give you a piece of paper. It's called a request for information, and it'll tell you the deadline to turn in everything. So technically, you do not need a QIT drafted and executed before applying for Medicaid. You find out that you need one after you've applied for it.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. And I know you mentioned 30 days, and that is something that I think is a common misconception. You know, when I speak to families, they say, you know, when I spoke to Medicaid, they told me I have 30 days, but the facility said you have to have everything done in the same month that you apply to be covered for that month. For example, you know, if I applied today on April 25th, and I would, you know, by 30-day standard, I would have until, you know, sometime in May. But, you know, what a lot of families are hearing is that they would have to have by the end of April. And I think that's something that's confusing to families. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. It definitely is confusing. The 30 days time frame runs from the date that you apply for Medicaid. So you'll actually get a document from the worker at the cabinet showing you the deadline to turn in all those documents. So it's 30 days from the date that you apply for Medicaid. And again, you can reference that number based on the written information that they give you after your appointment. So that's what you're going by. Now, the issue with some nursing homes pressuring people to go ahead and have the QIT done is because they don't want that to be a reason for someone not to get Medicaid. So it's not impermissible to set up a qualifying income trust before you walk into the cabinet to apply for Medicaid. You can do that in advance, but what you don't want to do is to do it like 5 months before you think you're going to need Medicaid. Because the only reason why you do this qualifying income trust is to make yourself eligible for Medicaid. So I usually don't recommend people get one of these until they've actually applied for Medicaid, because that's the only time you want to use it. Just kind of briefly to tell you what this actually does. I know you're probably going to ask me some questions, but you actually have to put money into the account. So that's one reason why you don't want to set up something before you actually need it.
Thanks, Stephanie. I want to build on that. So whether you use your local legal aid or your own private attorney to help you draft this QIT document, that's not the end of the line for the QIT. What happens once you have the trust document in hand, Stephanie? What do you do with it?
So once you have the trust drafted, you have to go to a bank and open up a new checking account. When I say you, I mean the trustee. So the actual resident that's in the nursing home has to appoint a trustee that's going to handle this qualifying income trust. And only the trustee can set up a checking account for this trust. And they put money in it that was given to them from the resident in the nursing home. And so it's a checking account that's established solely for the qualifying income trust. And a lot of times what people do is they get asked for kind of like a payee checking account. And what happens is that it's tied to the nursing home resident's social security number. There's no tax ID number, no EIN, because you can't get one. This is a very special kind of trust where you don't need a separate tax ID number for it. So the checking account is tied to the nursing home resident's social security number, but they are not allowed to draw money off of it. Only the trustee can withdraw money and pay checks out of that special checking account.
And so it does have to be a brand new account. You can't use an account that you had previously opened.
That's correct. It has to be a brand new account only for this QIT.
Can you have it at the same bank that you had previously used?
Yes, and that's a great thing to do because you need an account that doesn't charge you any fees. And sometimes that's hard if you don't have a relationship with the bank because they're not going to make any money off of this account, because once you put the money in the account, then you pay the money out of the account. So there's not going to be any regular ongoing balance stay in the account, so the bank's not going to make any money off of it. So it's kind of a courtesy checking account that they set up for you. You want one that doesn't charge you any fees to have an account and has a very small minimum balance.
Thank you. What about how much money you can put in the account? Do you have to put all of your income in the account?
So that depends on how the attorney establishes your trust. There are two different ways that you can set up a qualifying income trust. My favorite way is to only put the money that you make over that special needs standard into it. That way your money is not tied up into a trust account, because there are limits on what you can spend the money on. Some people choose to put all of their money into the QIT. So it would really depend on how you set up the trust. And there's those two different ways. So only put your excess income into it over the special needs standard, if that's how you establish the trust when it's drafted, or if you decide to put all of your income in there, which is my least favorite kind, because there are restrictions on how you can use the money.
Okay, Stephanie, when you mention how you can use the money, I think that is one of the most confusing things for families. Because, you know, they have this account, they have the money that they're putting in it each month. What are some things that they can use this for? I know that, you know, residents on long-term care Medicaid in the nursing home get a $40 personal needs allowance, and that money can come from this. But what are some other things that they can do?
Absolutely. The best thing to use the money out of the trust for is to pay the patient liability. That's the amount that the cabinet determines what you have to pay for your portion of the care at the nursing home, which typically is, if you're single, this isn't when you're a spouse, but when you're single, they take your gross income and they subtract off that $40 personal needs allowance, and they subtract off your health insurance premiums. And then typically what's left after that calculation is your patient liability. That's your portion of the nursing home bill you have to pay. So that is the best thing to pay out of the qualifying income trust, because it's the same amount each month. You're going to deposit money into the checking account each month and then pay it out. And if you only pay one check out just to pay for your patient liability, and it won't pay for all of it, it'll just pay for some of it, that's the easiest way to keep an accounting of it. Some other permissible things, though, other than the patient liability and the personal needs allowance, would be to pay your community spouse allowance. So when you're in a nursing home, and if you are married and you have a spouse that lives at home and is not in an institution, there are protections for you that keep you from being destitute in Kentucky. So Kentucky protects spouses. They don't require the spouse to pay their income to pay for the nursing home, but they will do a calculation to see if the spouse can keep some of the nursing home residents' income to be able to live, to continue to stay at their home and have money to survive. Because sometimes, you know, the spouse that's in the nursing home had the higher income, and the community spouse at home depends on that income to survive. So Kentucky has protections in place to protect some of that income for what they call the community spouse. So you can pay the community spousal allowance, or if it was someone younger who had a dependent minor child at home, then there's a family allowance for that child as well. So that those are some permissible things. One thing that you could get, other than health insurance, also you can pay your health insurance from the account. But one thing that you can get is if you have a medical expense that is not covered by your health insurance, which could be Medicare or retiree plan or Medicaid, then you can ask for permission from the cabinet to use the money in the trust to pay for that medically necessary expense that isn't covered by insurance. So you get a statement from the physician as to why the expense is medically necessary, and you get a copy or an estimate of the bill. And you know, if it's already happened, the bill should say when it was incurred and verification of how much that's due. The common example of this is, when people lose their glasses or their dentures, hearing aids, these things that aren't typically covered by most insurances on a regular basis, then, those are medically necessary things that you need to have. Well, if you give all of your money except for $40 a month to pay for your nursing home care, you don't have any money to pay for those things that are medically necessary that insurance won't cover. So you can write a letter with all that verification and submit it to the cabinet, which, right now the Department for Community-Based Services is who takes the Medicaid applications for the Department of Medicaid Services. And you put that in writing and you ask for permission. And then if they grant the permission for you to do that, they would actually give you what they call a patient liability deviation or patient liability offset, where they reduce the amount that you have to pay the nursing home for a month and allow you to use that money that you would have paid the nursing home to pay for that medically necessary thing. So it could be a medical bill, or it could be that you need glasses because you've got to pay for glasses before you can get them. They don't let you just get them and then pay them later. So it's a really great thing, that you can spend the money on, but you've got to get permission first.
Stephanie, I think that is great information. I think that's something we see a lot with families, that they, they're not aware that they can do these things. I know you mentioned the spousal allowance. I think this is something that a lot of families don't realize if it's not done, automatically whenever their calculations are done. Because I've seen a lot of family members that, wives have said, I'm paying all my money to the nursing home. I don't have enough income to pay my bills. How can these families ask for this? Is this something that they ask DCBS, or how do they go about getting this spousal allowance and getting these calculations done?
Sure. So the spousal allowance should actually be done when you apply for Medicaid, and then at each yearly recertification. Now, what happens sometimes is that the community spouse, they have to turn in verification of their household expenses. And so whether they have rent or mortgage, their homeowner's insurance, their property taxes, and their necessary utilities. So not internet or cable, but for your gas and electric and telephone, you turn in verification of all of your household expenses, and you turn in verification of your income. And they will do a calculation to determine, based on your shelter expenses, to see if you can get some additional spousal allowance because your expenses are so high. And they look at your income to see if you meet the minimum amount. So they set a level each year. Right now, the spousal allowance, the minimum is $2,178. So if your income as the community spouse is less than that amount, and then sometimes you can get extra because of your household expenses, they'll do a calculation to see how much of the nursing home residence money you get to keep and you get paid that by your spouse, so to help you survive. Something that worries people, though, is they think, oh gosh, they're going to take all of my money too. How will I survive? They never take the community spouse's income. Never. The only income they take to pay for the nursing home care is the actual nursing home resident. So as a community spouse, they can give you a right to get some of your spouse's income, but they can't touch your income.
Stephanie, we're talking about the community spouse being able to keep some income. And I just want to throw out there that, just to give people some comfort, it is rare that a community spouse would not be able to keep their home. In most circumstances, they don't have to worry about losing their home. But what about savings? What about money that they've saved up between them?
Absolutely. And just to touch on the home, that's one of the biggest concerns that people have when they think about going on Medicaid, is that they'll have somebody tell them, or there's this misconceived notion that you're going to lose your house, that the state will take your home from you if you go in a nursing home. That's just not the case. The state will never take somebody's home from them. Now, if you have a community spouse that's living in that home, that house does not count as an asset. So it doesn't get counted in the asset limits. So it's protected. They protect you as a community spouse. So if you've got a spouse that lives in the home, you're not going to have to sell that home, and they won't count it as an asset. So what they do, though, as far as like your checking and your savings, your stocks, your bonds, any other kind of resource that you have, they will do a resource assessment, and you should ask for a resource assessment to be done when you're in the nursing home. So when you get admitted to the nursing home, if you've been there for 30 days, even if you don't think you qualify for Medicaid yet, you can get them to do a resource assessment at the Department for Community-Based Services, and they will ask to look at proof of all of everyone's assets. So both spouses, so the nursing home resident and the community spouse, doesn't matter whose name is on it. They will add them all up and then divide them in half. And in Kentucky, right off the top, they make sure that you can keep at least $27,480. Now that changes yearly, so you can ask the cabinet what it is at the time that you apply. But right off the top, they protect you. If you've got more than that, though, that's when they divide all of your amount of assets in half and then tell you, what you would have to spend down in order to be eligible for Medicaid. So there are protections in place. If you have a lot of assets, it helps to sometimes talk to an estate planning attorney before going into the nursing home and to plan things out. So I recommend that if you have a lot of assets, you need to do estate planning at least 5 years before you think you're going to need to be in a nursing home. So it's worth consulting with a private attorney that specializes in Medicaid estate planning.
Are there any other kind of assets that you can keep and that aren't counted against you for this?
Well, I won't put out a full, exclusive list, but one common one would be like IRAs. An IRA is not counted as an asset if you're taking money out of it. So if you're old enough to have a required minimum distribution, they just count that distribution as income. If you're over 59 and a half years old, they will want you to take something out of the IRA. So you would work with your bank on whatever the minimum was that you could take. And then that gets counted as income. But it is not a resource. So as long as you're taking out the required minimum distribution, then it doesn't get counted as a resource. And some people have a good chunk of money in an IRA. So that's a really beneficial thing. Yeah.
What about a vehicle, Stephanie? We get a lot of, especially community spouses, that are worried that they'll lose their vehicle.
One vehicle is excluded as an asset for a community when you have a community spouse. So you could have, it doesn't matter the value of it. If you have to spend down money, sometimes that's a good thing to do. Get a new car because it doesn't matter. The value of it for that community spouse. It could be a really nice, fancy car if you wanted, and it doesn't get counted as an asset.
I think this is such an important conversation because we see a lot of spouses who come to us after they've paid their life savings to the nursing home because they thought they had to just completely spend all their money before they could qualify. So I think these questions and answers can really help some folks. Another question we get a lot is, what about someone who has some life insurance?
Sure. So a life insurance policy can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes it's hard for you to get verification from your insurance company as to if it has a cash surrender value. So some policies don't have one, but if your policy has a cash surrender value, the amount that's over $1,500 can be counted as a resource. So it counts against the resource limit, because if you're a single individual, you can only have $2,000 in resources. So sometimes people, if they haven't already prearranged their burial, sometimes they go ahead and assign ownership of their life insurance policy to the funeral home that they're going to use, and they prearrange for their burial.
Hey, Stephanie. I know we've talked a lot about estate planning, which I think is, this is all wonderful information because I think, when families are going into the nursing home, it's such a difficult time, and there's so many things coming at them at once to have to know all this information. I did want to mention, and correct me if I'm wrong, Medicaid does have a 5-year look back period. Is that correct? Because I think, people think about, well, we're going to have to put mom in the nursing home, so, let's do this with her assets. But, if I'm understanding right, they do need to be, keep in mind that there is that 5-year look back period with their assets, correct?
Right. So what that means is that when you go and apply for long-term care Medicaid, they will ask you, have you given away anything or have you sold something for less than fair market value? So a common issue that we see is where a family's trying to protect, maybe, a home or a family farm or something like that. If they even just put their kid's name on the deed within the 5 years of applying for Medicaid, that can cause someone to have a transfer of resource penalty period. So this is one of the big reasons why we get people calling us when they've been denied Medicaid, is because they either sold something for less than what it was worth. So maybe they had a house and the child wasn't trying to do anything devious, but they sold it to their neighbor's child or something just because whatever they thought it was worth, but they didn't investigate what the value of the house actually was. And especially in today's times, the value of houses are much higher than what you would think. It's inflated. So, you always have to make sure when you're going to sell an asset, it's sold for fair market value. So for a home, you can find out what the fair market value is by contacting the PVA office and get that in writing as to what they assess the value of the property to be worth. If you wanted to sell it for less than that, you could hire an appraiser to come appraise the property, and the cabinet would look at that appraisal to, determine if it was sold for fair market value. So that's really important to make sure, you're not giving away things or you're not selling things for less than what they're worth. And even if people are doing this innocently, it can cause severe penalties. They will do a calculation based on how much they determine you either gave away or, sold for less than fair market value. And it makes a penalty where you cannot get Medicaid for however many days that penalty equaled. And so that means often that people end up getting discharge notices from the nursing home.
Stephanie, I think that's really important that you mentioned about getting an appraiser if you want to sell the house for fair market value, because I think, something that I've seen that is important for families to think about. I've seen while the family member is in the nursing home that the house has lost value because the family can't afford upkeep, or the resident can't afford upkeep because they're only getting the $40 a month. So, I think that is something very important to keep in mind if you're looking at are at the point that you have to sell your home.
Right, that's definitely important. And another thing too, if say you have a single individual who has a home and it needs to be sold, well, when you list it up for sale with a realtor, Medicaid will no longer count that as an asset against you. So while you're waiting for it to be sold, if you're listing it with a realtor, you're making good attempts to sell the property, they won't count it against you. So if it takes some time to sell it, you're not going to get penalized from Medicaid for that.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think this has been really good information that can really help some folks during this difficult time of looking at nursing home placement. It really is one of the most stressful things you can go through. And I want to say, one of the things we do here at Legal Aid is, we can help you through this process. Amanda and I meet with folks all the time, residents and their families, and kind of counsel them, hold their hand through this the application process, answer questions about Medicaid before they apply. If you live in one of our counties, for Amanda and I, Bath, Menifee, Montgomery, Morgan, Round, Boyd, Carter, Greenup, Lawrence, or Elliott, we're here. You should reach out to us. You see our phone numbers and our emails on the screen there. And if you have more questions than we've answered today, we're here to help you. We can talk to you on the phone. We can make an appointment and meet with you in our office. So just reach out. And if you live in another area that we don't cover, give us a call and we can point you in the right direction on who to talk to there. We really want to thank everyone for joining us today on behalf of Legal Aid of the Bluegrass. Once again, if you have further questions, don't hesitate to give us a call.